Hey gardeners, it's Enlightenment Garden. Behind me is the boswellia sacra. It's better known as frankincense. And if you live in climates of USDA zone 9B and above, you can grow this plant in the ground. This plant was grown from a cutting back in 2013. I've been growing this frankincense tree in the ground in my Phoenix, Arizona yard. Today I want to talk to you about how to grow this plant. In front is the second boswellia sacra that I planted in spring. The plant came from a cutting that I propagated from the mother plant that I rooted for about 10 months before putting in the ground. These plants cannot tolerate frost. We got into the low 20s for a week this past winter. This plant was planted after that event. Exposed to 30s, low 30s can do quite a bit of damage. So if you're going to be planting in the ground, I suggest doing it in spring, similar to any other kind of tropical. On planting, I used half native clay soil, half cactus mix. The nice thing about frankincense trees is they're quite adaptable. They do well in both sandy, loamy soils, such as you'd find in Florida, in high humidity. They also thrive quite well in the desert. In fact, my tree came from Jason Esmalaya, who owns the Mini Tree Nursery. He is actually responsible for bringing this plant into the United States, Yemen. These plants are actually native to the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so let's talk about care. On watering, you do not want the soil to dry out. This is not a cactus. These do need frequent waterings, especially when they're young, because the root system is not large. It's going to need more frequent waterings, less volume. Once the roots put on some size in a few months, I'll start adding deep watering as well as regular waterings, keeping the soil moist around the roots. I've had good success feeding my young boswellia sacras with a low concentration of NPK, so I use Schultz's cactus food. It's a 277 formulation, and that tends to not burn them and give them enough food to put on growth during the growing season. Now, given that this plant is planted out in full sun, I will need to shade protect it once we are in the hundreds here. So I will put some 50% shade cloth up its first summer. Once lows drop below 40, frankincense starts to go dormant. It's going to drop its leaves. It does not like it cold. Once it drops below freezing, your plant can be damaged by frost. To prevent that from happening, I would suggest putting frost cloth around the plant its first few winters, and then also applying a heat source at the bottom to keep it warm, to raise those temperatures up. The mature frankincense you saw earlier survived a week of lows in the 20s, mid-20s. And frankincense isn't supposed to survive that. Once a tree has been in the ground for 6 years, it'll be able to tolerate that. I did have to prune off a couple feet of top growth on it. They got frozen back, but it survived. Frankincense tends to be fairly slow growing. If it has a choice, frankincense is going to do a whole lot better in the ground than in a container. You can expect about a double growth rate the first year, and it will do about the same the next year. You can see at the bottom here that the plant is starting to put on some buds, and those will actually turn into seed pods. And it is possible to propagate this plant via seed. However, the germination rates are fairly poor on this plant. If you are interested in seeds, Mini Tree does sell them. I believe they're currently selling them. That's a good source However, don't expect germination rates above 10% on this plant. Okay, so let's say that your garden zone is not 9B or higher. You're less than that. What that means is you can't put this plant in the ground because that would expose it to frost and kill it, but you can definitely grow it in a container. In front are a few 2-gallon frankincense plants that I propagated from cuttings. These were rooted actually last summer, so they've been in containers for about 10 months now. They have pretty good root systems on them. So on care. Air temperature, you're going to want to keep this plant probably in a greenhouse environment or indoors in a sunny location. You really don't want to expose it to less than 40 degrees, and it's best to not have temperatures go above 110. And if possible, maintain humidity at 20%. For soil, a 1-to-1 ratio of cactus mix and perlite. You can see the perlite here on top. You want a very good draining soil media for these plants. On location, the east side of your home might be a perfect option. You know, if you're in a hot, dry climate like Arizona, you don't want your container plants to cook. Frankincense is no exception. They are in morning sun and afternoon shade, so by 11:30, 12 p.m. they're in shade. They're not getting hit with direct sun. Containers can get up to 160 degrees in triple digits in full sun, and that can cook the roots. So we want to prevent that. In other parts of the country where you don't get so hot, you could probably leave them in sun all day long. It's just in areas that are excessively hot, you know, where we're talking temperatures in excess of 95 degrees, you do not want to expose your plant to too much direct sun. And if you're growing your plant inside, in a greenhouse or inside your home, you want as much sun exposure as possible during the day, because it's going to be less intense when it's inside. Okay, on container size, these are in 2-gallon containers. I up the container size once the plant's fully rooted out in its current container, and that usually takes a full 12 months of growing time. So these plants can go to 3-gallon probably at the end of summer. So it'll be an annual process of up-potting. Don't up-pot it unnecessarily. So if the roots haven't fully grown out, you don't want to put it in a larger pot, because that'll cause soil around it to stay wet and could cause rot issues. So only up-pot it when the roots have outgrown the current container. And of course, the container you use, you definitely want good drainage on the bottom so that you're not locking water in. Watering, it's going to depend on the ambient air temperature, the amount of sun exposure, and the level of humidity. If you're here in Arizona, you know, I'll just hit this with a watering can at this time probably every other day. And that's about all I do. So I'm not putting a vast amount of water in. This is going to drain well because of the porous mixture. So you can see there wasn't a huge amount of water. With frankincense, it's better to use smaller volumes and do it frequently, especially if your plant's outside. If you're indoors, you're not going to have to do this as often. You could probably water it once a week. Just make sure your soil is moist and not wet, because that could introduce root rot. The product I use for feeding my in-ground and container frankincense, this right here is fairly innocuous. It gives the plant some food, some nutrition, but it doesn't cause any burning on it. So it's a 2:7:7 ratio. I add 7 drops of the solution to my watering can and soak that in. And I do this every week to 2 weeks. There's really no need to prune your frankincense unless you dislike the structure of it. Like you want to reduce the height of the tree, like this one is fairly tall. You can shorten it, but pruning really doesn't help encourage new branching. It's only if you need to rework the shape of the tree. Come wintertime, these plants, with the drop in light exposure, are going to drop their leaves because they don't have the energy to hold on to them. They don't have the energy from the sun to really support their leaves during the winter, so it's not uncommon for your plant to drop them. So don't fret if that happens. Once temperatures warm back up and the lows are above 50 degrees, the plant will begin to start pushing new leaves and branches. Whether you're growing frankincense or are looking into acquiring a plant, I hope you found this video helpful in how to care for it, whether you're growing in the ground or in a container. Thanks for watching.